Living God, fall fresh on us. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Our gospel is rich with spiritual food this morning. We hear of the power of God to calm even the winds. We witness the constant presence of God even when Jesus is sleeping. We experience the patience of God when the disciples awake Jesus in their distress. Is the gospel today all about Jesus and the power of God? The disciples seem pretty distressed and stressed out. From Jesus' response, it sounds like the disciples might have maybe even overreacted to the storm. I hear Jesus in between the lines saying, "Really? You woke me up for that?" When do we go to Jesus, and how often? Our answers will depend in part on the level of anxiety that you and I carry in our lives and how easily distressed we are about change. Probably by now you know I love humor about change. A few months ago in Voices, I included a cartoon of a preacher saying to the congregation, "Is there a need for change in the wider church?" Everyone says, "Yes, yes." Then the preacher says, "We need to change and all look. We all need to change in this congregation." Everyone looks down. We all have triggers to change we don't like and that frustrate us, and other changes that have almost no impact on us. I'll tell you a few stories about me. I dislike changes in my favorite restaurants and store food menus. Whole Foods Arden Arcade used to make a wonderful salmon pot pie just when I arrived in Sacramento, but they no longer do so. I've begged and begged for them to bring it back, but they haven't, and I miss my salmon pot pie. Not a big deal, but a disappointment. In New York City, there are no longer token booths, and so riders have to buy a card that they swipe at the turnstile to get on the subway. You would think that would be in favor of I would be in favor of such an innovative, efficient, and cost-effective approach. But with my tremor, I find it very difficult to swipe the card. In February, when I was in New York City, my tremor was so wild one day that the way I swiped the card, it read it 3 times, and then I was out of money to take the ride. Not a happy day. The swipe card is more than disappointing to me. The swipe card is also frustrating. It's so frustrating that if somebody is with me, I ask for them to swipe for me. When Stephanie came to New York, I was delighted. I was like, "You swipe for me." Alternatively, when possible, I find another way to travel than the subway. When I was in New York last, I got a lot of exercise because I walked many, many blocks instead of taking the subway. The pot pie and the subway swipe card are not so disturbing that I have to run to Jesus with my complaints. Nonetheless, sometimes I have run to Jesus with the most nonsensical stuff. You know the stuff that is going to take its course and take care of itself if we just would be a little bit more patient. Sometimes, like the disciples, it has been a storm. When I was more regularly driving between Fair Oaks and Reno, in the winter weather conditions of ice, snow, and fog, I found myself on occasion calling out to God to be with me. Of course, I knew God was with me, but even so, I called out. I recall one day being in a total whiteout and being terrified of the weather conditions. I knew it was very unlikely that God was going to turn the winter storm into a sunny day, but there I was. We have some responsibility for when we cry out to God for help. When do we go to Jesus to rely on the power of God? Don't get me wrong, Jesus does want us to reach out and ask for what we need. I'm doubtful that Jesus wants us to ask Jesus to bring back the pot pie at Whole Foods or tell the New York City subway system to go back to Duggan's. It's more likely that Jesus wants us to get over ourselves about the little things in life that upset us. Discern the difference between our preferences and our needs. Take responsibility for the needs we are able to address for ourselves. Once we take responsibility for ourselves and our needs, then we discover that we have more energy for what is really important and of concern to God. If we are not always concerned about the little disturbances in our lives, then we have more spiritual energy to be concerned about what concerns God. Imagine if I went to God to fix the world of frustration due to my tremor. If that were to happen, my needs would be prioritized over everybody else's needs. I would become the center of God's attention. We should go to God with our needs, but we should try to discern our needs and go to God when it is really necessary. For ourselves, it is likely that our need to go to God for our own little needs will be far less important and far less frequent. With all of this additional spiritual space in our lives, we are likely to have more room to show concern over the needs of others. When we go to God for the needs of others, we don't just drop our petitions in God's lap, but we also work with God to be God's hands in the world. Just this week, Pope Francis said, "Let us pray for the hungry, and then let us go feed them." On this Father's Day, I'm thinking about my dad and all I had learned about the spiritual life from him. My dad always said, I'm sure he was not the only one to say this, he always said, God helps those who help themselves. My dad did not mean that we should be thoroughly self-sufficient and distance ourselves from God. My dad taught us kids to take responsibility, to meet our needs and go to God with the needs that only God can take care of. If we believe that we share responsibility with God for taking care of our needs, then the content of our prayer will change, and also the way we spend our time. We will be opened up to cry for the world's needs as the world cries. My dad also encouraged us to pray for those who have nobody to pray for them. He was so sensitive to those who had no one to pray for them in the world. If we have more spiritual energy, then we will care for those for whom God's time is taken, weeping over their needs. The disciples woke Jesus up to calm the storm. When are we disturbed enough by our neighbor's needs that we go to God to take responsibility with God to make changes in our neighbor's well-being? Let us make an effort for other people's storms to take precedence over our inconveniences. There are many storms in our midst and just beyond our neighborhoods for us to pray. In the park across the street, there are many homeless. Some homeless have names for us, like Jesse, who now have absolutely nobody left in the world that cares about him. No one who knows his name but you and I. How do we care for Jesse or for others without rescuing? Some storms in life are so relentless that we do not have easy answers for the way to bring calm. It's times like these that we need to pray, reflect, study, and discern before we are able to act. In addition to prayer, we must discern when and where we share responsibility with God. We can't do everything, but we can always do more, especially for those in the relentless storms of people's lives that leave them without the basics of life. The good news today is that we are in partnership with God. As soon as we turn to God, God is there. So let us take care about the way we use this privilege of God's presence in our lives. Let us wisely call upon God's compassionate care and love for the urgent needs of the world. Let us take our part in helping Jesus build God's kingdom of compassion, love, and justice in our world. And let us pray this week, this Sunday, joining our voices with those around the world who are praying for the lost loved ones in Charleston this past week. These men and women went to church, a place of life and love, only to lose their life. I want to close my sermon this morning by honoring these people, by praying for each person by name, and to give their name a little bit of identity. Cynthia Hurd, 54, branch manager for the Charleston County Library System. Susie Jackson, 87 years old, longtime church member. Ethel Lance, 70, employee of Emmanuel AME Church for 30 years. The Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, 49, admissions counselor of South Wesleyan University. The Honorable Reverend Clementa Pickney, 41, state senator, pastor of Emmanuel AME Church. Twanza Sanders, 26, earned her business administration degree from Allen University. The Reverend Daniel Simmons, senior, 74 years old, retired pastor. The Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton, 45 years old, track coach at Goose Creek High School. Mira Thompson, 59 years old, a church member. May God, who calms the fiercest of storms, be present to our brothers and sisters of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. Let us reaffirm our baptismal vow to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. And we commit ourselves as Christians and as Episcopalians with the entire diocese at the invitation of our bishop just yesterday to speak against the legacy of institutionalized racism in the United States and across the world. Yes, my brothers and sisters, I know these are overwhelming societal conditions of evil that defy the energy of any one of us to correct. We, like the disciples, know the storms like Charleston are too great for any of us to bring calm without turning ourselves over completely to the protection and love of our compassionate and just God. Together with God, let us strive to make a difference so that all people may live without fear, especially and not only in the houses of God around the world. God bless you.